Here Now, coming this fall from The Atlantic.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
The program will begin in 5 minutes. I thought, surely we're not that far gone. and then I realized maybe we are, actually.
There's a common perception that democracy ends with a battle, soldiers in the streets, a coup d'etat, the fall of a government.
Modern-day authoritarians do not come into power by brute force.
No, democracy's lost one little step at a time.
Modern-day authoritarians come to power by winning democratic elections, but then once they get into power, tilting all the levers of power in their favor.
We know this because we have studied how autocracies take hold.
My nightmare is that fascism comes to America, but it's marching under the banner of freedom.
We've reported from places where freedoms are curtailed and corruption flourishes.
If you are accused of something, you're going to be proven guilty. There are no exceptions.
We've seen with our own eyes what happens when democracy gives way to authoritarianism.
When we look at America today, right now, we see a place where the slide to autocracy has already begun.
It's not some distant future, it's the present. The evidence can be found in the tightening grip of conspiracy theories.
Never in a million years would I have thought that somebody would have accused me of shredding ballots from the 2020 election, feeding them to chickens, and then burning the chickens to cover the evidence.
It can be seen in the misuse of investigations and the fragility of the courts.
I just kept saying, when do we get to the part where the facts come out?
There are signs of autocracy in the growth of dark money and the lack of transparency in politics.
This is a beast that is stalking America's political landscape.
To understand it, you've got to look around the world.
The struggle for a transition to democracy in Venezuela, we are fighting a global fight.
And you have to look to history.
You go to the records and you'll see that the voters of that election voted in alphabetical order. Can you figure that out?
That's pretty sloppy cheating.
No, it's not sloppy, it's blatant.
I'm Ann Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
I'm Peter Pomerantsev, a senior fellow at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University.
Coming this September, a new podcast from The Atlantic, Autocracy in America.
Please take your seats. The program will begin momentarily. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. The program is about to begin. The Atlantic promotes and protects the free exchange of ideas through prohibiting the physical or virtual disruption, shouting down, blocking, or suppressing an invited speaker's right to speak. Please note disruptions of this nature will result in removal from the Atlantic Festival. Thank you for your support of this event.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudine Abade. I'm the executive producer of audio for The Atlantic. I'm very delighted that you all are here today to join us for this live recording of Radio Atlantic. Radio Atlantic, if you don't already know, is where you come to hear the same strong journalism and powerful storytelling that you get from the magazine. It's where you're going to hear your favorite Atlantic writers, as well as a lot of original journalism that we do in audio. Today, we'll address a disorienting and distressing aspect of the 2024 election, and we're going to try to put it in context of history. This past weekend, a would-be assassin came close to former President Trump while he was golfing. Roughly 2 months earlier, a gunman shot at him at a Pennsylvania rally. These two events add to an already heated political environment where violent rhetoric has become common. To discuss the nature of political assassinations in the current moment, we have staff writer Tom Nichols. Tom is a retired professor from the U.S. Naval War College. He's spent a career thinking and writing about democracy, national security, and the nature of conflict. He'll be interviewed by Hanna Rosin. Hanna is the host of Radio Atlantic. She's also the co-host with Lauren Ober of a new podcast. First episode was out yesterday, called We Live Here Now. Before we dive in, please silence your cell phones, but if you could, keep them handy. If something you see or hear today captures your attention, we would love for you to share it on social media using the hashtag TAF24. Now, please, welcome Tom Nichols and the host of Radio Atlantic, Hanna Rosin.
Oh, I thought that music was going to stay with us. Like, you know, like it comes with the sound design. Okay, question for the audience before we begin. Who here has seen a live podcast show? Okay, great. So I'll explain it a little bit. I'm not going to do anything corny like, you know, laugh now or anything like that, or time to clap. However, there is a little bit of political theater, a little bit of theater involved. We're doing this as if we're taping a live show. We are taping the show. It is going to air. And so I would like to invite you all to be part of that performance. Letting you know that just if you have anything to express yourselves with your hands or your mouth or anything like that. This is all getting recorded, and it's going to be part of our Radio Atlantic feed. So, you ready to begin? Okay, here we go. Hello. Why was that funny? I'll do it again. Hello, and welcome to this live Radio Atlantic here at the Atlantic Festival. I'm Hanna Rosin, host of Radio Atlantic, and with me on stage is Atlantic staff writer Tom Nichols. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Hanna.
Thank you for coming. For those of you out there who don't know him, Tom is a professor emeritus at the U.S. Naval War College. He writes about history, democracy, and national security. That's the official bio. I'm going to tell you why I love talking to Tom, which is that he has a unique ability to meld together like a news story that happened yesterday, a movie from the 1970s, and some kind of, you know, giant sweep and arc of military history and make it all seem like seamless. So anyway, it's a total pleasure to hear Tom talk and to talk to Tom whenever I can. We should have planned it beforehand to where I actually do have an amazing cat blouse, which I'm not wearing, but if I had known that Tom would be a partner in that, what does that mean you're a cat lady?
I'm a total sucker for cats, and I have a new kitten that we recently adopted.
Woo! Named?
And, I'm wrapped around her little tiny paw, and I think I'm in charge, and I'm really not. Question.
Has anybody eaten/attempted to eat your kitten?
Well, you know, yesterday she went into a hidey place and I couldn't find her, so I started going through my neighborhood looking for immigrants.
I have to say that's my favorite part of the story. Well, A, that the cat's name is Miss Sassy, but B, that the cat was hiding in the basement.
It's the best part.
Who doesn't know that a cat hides in the basement? Who goes all the way from my cat's hiding in the basement to there's a global conspiracy to eat cats?
And I have to go out in the street and start like checking passports.
Yes.
to see if someone ate my cat. I mean,
Yes.
These are words I didn't think that I would ever string together in the 21st century. You know, like, did an immigrant eat my cat?
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
Yes, when I had a new kitten, we are so off topic, sorry. When I had a new kitten, he did hide. That was a gendered mistake, sorry, not all cats are female. But anyway, when I had a new cat, the cat hid in the closet. I became hysterical. I did walk around the neighborhood, but just to look for the cat. Like, that's it. I was just looking for the cat, you know?
I think they do it just to see what we'll do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, back to the previously scheduled programming. So, as Claudine mentioned, it's been less than a week since a would-be assassin was arrested at the golf course where Trump was golfing. And before that, not even 2 months before that, no, just a little over 2 months before that, there was another attempt on Trump's life. There is something different about these would-be assassins, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the nature of the modern assassin. Except, I'm going to start this conversation in 1975. That's in honor of Tom. In 1975, it does seem like an incredibly short period to have 2 attempted assassinations, but it has happened before, and that was in 1975. So, Tom, I see you already nodding. Tell me what happened in 1975. Tell us.
Donald Trump had 2 attempts on him in 2 months. Gerald Ford, and really think about it. Why would anybody want to kill Gerald Ford? You know,
Right.
just the nicest guy in the world.
It's like eating a kitten. It's like the nicest. Yeah.
That's the metaphor I wouldn't have gone for, but I see it now.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, it's, you know, nobody had voted for him. He was an accidental president. And yet, he had 2 attempts on him in like 17 days, which is incredible. And one of them, this sounds like the plot for a bad 70s TV movie. One of them was a member of the Manson family. Squeaky Fromm came after him. And the other was a dedicated... I don't know how to describe her, dedicated revolutionary, kind of suburban revolutionary named Sarah Jane Moore, who was obsessed with Vietnam and thought that taking out Gerald Ford would spark a revolution. I don't know how you get to that in your head, saying, if I kill Gerald Ford, that's the moment people go into the streets.
Yeah.
And, you know, overthrow the regime or something. But that was, and in both cases, Ford just got lucky. These assassins got within a few feet. The guy in Pennsylvania was a couple hundred yards, 150 yards away, and a kind of big mistake by the Secret Service to let that happen. The guy in Florida was hundreds of yards away, and good for the Secret Service that they actually got to him. They were doing their job. They were doing advance. They got out there. But you know, very different circumstances that you could get that close to an American president. And I would also point out how close to Reagan John Hinckley was able to get.
But wait, we're staying in 1975 for now.
Right.
So the critical thing here
I've got my
is-
disco shoes on.
I know. Great. I just know that you know so much history that I'm the history editor here. So we're in 1975. The important part of what Tom is talking about is the narrative that these 2 women put on why they wanted to kill Gerald Ford. I'm not saying it was a good narrative or an effective one, but what was the nature of the narrative? It was political. Like, they had a political motive.
Definitely for Sarah Jane Moore. Asking what Squeaky Fromm thinks about anything is really asking to walk into a dark place. Why would a member of the Manson family want to kill anyone is kind of answers its own question, I guess. But they weren't, this wasn't like random loners. Like, one of them was a no-kidding celebrity. I mean, everybody in America knew who Squeaky Fromm was. They knew her nickname. But Moore had a distinctly political point of view. And as you and I were talking just before we came out, she was unrepentant about it for like 40 years. I mean, she eventually did a lot of time and was paroled, and you said, yeah, that's what I meant to do. I wasn't having a bad day. I had a very conscious notion of what I was doing politically.
And do you think that's what colors our cultural notion of what an assassin is about? That we've inherited this notion I mean, there are periods of high assassination activity, but of an assassin as someone who is politically motivated.
Yeah, we really want to believe that. And if you go back, since we're staying with history, I mean, if you go back far enough, there was always this sense that assassins might be crazy, but they have agendas. And terrorists, same thing about terrorists. If you've never read The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad, right? It's about an anarchist who's going to plant a bomb, and he's kind of nuts. But on the other hand, he's working for a foreign government, and you're not supposed to know who that government is, Russia. But he's going to do all these terrible things for a purpose. When we go back to earlier assassinations, they had a purpose. I don't mean to say that approvingly, but they had
a narrative. We can put it that way. Like they had a story about them. That story could be covered for the press. My aim was this. I was trying to get the country to do this. I was trying to show that the presidency was bankrupt for this reason. There was like a story you could tell about that.
Right. Abraham Lincoln, the last act of the Civil War. You had an anarchist attempting to assassinate someone. What changes? But the problem is we want to believe that is still the case because that makes assassinations, I would argue, more comprehensible and in a way less frightening than thinking about them just being kind of random weirdos.
Okay, so now let's move to the modern era. This has flummoxed me. I, as a journalist, and I bet you, as consumers of news, have sat down with these two assassins, their name, or would-be assassins, Thomas Matthew Crooks and Ryan Wesley Ruth are their names. And we look every day, it's the habit of a news consumer, what's up? Like, what were you after? What did you believe? What did you think? You keep searching for the news, and in both cases, nothing and nothing comprehensible. What do we know about the two of them?
Not much. And maybe we will never know more. I think going back to your question, Hanna, about our image of assassins, right? You say to someone, an assassin, and you think of a James Bond guy with black gloves, and he's kind of screwing a silencer, onto a rifle, and, he's got his night goggles and all that stuff. Yeah, there are guys like that, I suppose. I don't know any, just for the record. But that helps us to kind of comprehend this because that's a person with a history and a paycheck and a record, the Jackal, right? Like Carlos the Jackal, famous assassin. The problem with Crooks and Routh is they just come out of nowhere. We don't know anything about them. And we were putting them in this basket that we call assassins when I would argue they are just part of the general trend we've seen of mass killers, of school shooters, of people who attack public places. We're probably never going to know what Thomas Crooks was about in the same way we're never going to know what the guy in Las Vegas was thinking when he opened fire on that concert in Las Vegas. And people say, how can this be? The FBI is not doing its job. There must be a reason. This is the really scary part. Sometimes there might not be a reason, and it might not be a reason you're ever going to know.
Tom, I want to remind you of something. You and I work for The Atlantic, and as a result, we are desperate to make meaning of everything. So I want to try for a minute to say, this isn't, I'm exaggerating here, but just roll with me. So let's say we're in an era of a blank slate assassin, a school shooter, an assassin that is not related to anarchy, not an environmental. There are, violent environmental activists. Those people exist, but that we've now had two in a row of these assassins that are, like you said, like they lodge in our head more like school shooters than like political assassins. If it's a trend, what does it mean? Like, where does it come from?
Well, I did write a piece for The Atlantic called about the Lost Boys. I call them Lost Boys. And I think it tells you that we have these very dangerous people who have kind of become detached from society. They're isolated. I know it's sort of a stereotype, say, a loner, right? But there's a reason that meme kind of came into existence. I mean, Crooks in particular kind of just didn't exist outside of going to this kind of dead-end job that he was at I mean, he's a 20-year-old guy working, and look, people need to work in nursing homes. I mean, we have to take care of old people. But a 20-year-old guy who had no apparent life other than living at home with his folks and then going to the kitchen in a nursing home. We just aren't going to know a lot about that guy. And, you know, that personality type is increasingly the type that lashes out in a school, in a church, at a mall, wherever. And primarily, I think, and the one thing I think we can divine from what Crooks did by his searches, by his internet searches is, you know, no one ever noticed me, but they're going to remember me now. Like, this is my one shot, and I go down, and I'm remembered. I'm going to kill somebody famous.
So that's the motivation is just, I guess we can put a name to that. I mean, it is, we do narcissism in an age where individual brand and celebrity are very attainable for lots of people.
Right.
You know, you don't have to be Jodie Foster, obsessed with Jodie Foster. You can do it yourself. Like, you can be a self-made mini celebrity.
Yeah, and I think as well, because I mean, kind of where I thought you might be going, but it's worth pointing out. And also in an era, and I say era, period, basically since like the 70s, of where the barriers to entry to celebrityness or celebritydom are so low that you have a lot of people who now say, why not me? How did everybody else? Why does everybody else seem famous or happy or have a girlfriend or a cool job? You know, well, but there is this problem. This starts to pick up speed the more we know about each other through, you know, it starts with the computer era somewhat, but really picks up speed with social media, where people really do feel like, hey, every time I go to Facebook, you know, let's face it, nobody goes on Facebook and says, okay, so here's me coming out of rehab, and this is my son getting out of jail. I mean, it's always Facebook. Your life is awesome. And I think it does create people who say, why not me? And, you know, this kind of huge, one of the things you see with all of these school shooters, for example, massive insecurity next to towering narcissism, side by side. And the resolving that, you know, it was like, well, I'm going to live up to the sort of heroic and grandiose person that I think I should be.
Because I know you love movies, and because we were talking about the mid-70s.
You talking to me?
Yep. Exactly.
I don't see no one else here. Yeah, we were talking about this the other day. I mean, if you want to go back to kind of a great cultural touchstone about this, go rewatch Taxi Driver, because it was very prescient that you have this guy who's a social misfit, can't relate to, we were just talking about old New York. I feel like we're talking like pre-nuclear war New York, but, you know, like old New York where Times Square was still Times Square, if you get me. And how does he, you know, what's his idea of a date? He takes Sybil Shepherd to a porn theater. You know, he is totally a misfit, and then decides, well, he'll become famous. He'll be a hero. He's going to take out this politician. Now, they sort of zig instead of zag at the last moment in the movie, where he gets to be a hero by going in and, you know, blowing away a pimp. But it's very clear this is a guy who's going to explode and hurt someone at some point. And the fame issue, you saw it wasn't Arthur. Around that time, Arthur Bremer shoots George Wallace. And what's Bremer all about? Did he shoot Wallace because he's a racist and a bad guy? I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be somebody. And I want to make one more movie recommendation, and then I'll shut up about this. But De Niro keeps with this theme and makes another great Scorsese movie called The King of Comedy. And if you've never seen it, see it, because it's about a guy who captures a talk show host to force him to put him on TV on his talk show because he wants to be famous. And it's a really unsettling. It didn't play well at the theaters because it was unsettling, because it was supposed to be a comedy, And, De Niro's doing this weird, twitchy thing. And it was like, this isn't funny.
Yeah. I did rewatch Taxi Driver last night. I'll tell you a couple things I noticed. One is exactly like what you just said about Facebook. It's incredibly prescient because you watch him watching the world through the window. There's 3/4 of the movie is driving with him in his taxi. It is the experience of Facebook. He's driving in his taxi, peering into the windows of couples, people working, Sybil Shepherd at her office, and he's like, why not me? And then he goes home alone and he's alone. It's very prescient. The other thing is I looked up what were the other huge movies of that moment. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You could see the kind of like diversion. It's like one is highly political. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it's like everything is explained by politics, They're locking me up in here and it's a conspiracy, and the other is the lone wolf. There's just a lot of like seeds of what's become our world and the world we're talking about here.
And the anger of, the American right now talks a lot about the anger of young men. Well, a lot of these young men weren't even born in the 70s when Scorsese made this movie. There is always, young men with anger. And the real question is, does society, tame that, channel it, redirect it into other things? But the idea that this problem of these kind of anomic young men is new. I'm sorry, but Taxi Driver is over 50 years ago that this was made, and it was made about people that were born, in like the 50s.
Right. It's true. Every era has its particular flavor of disaffected man. Although as the author of the book, The End of Men, I feel like our era is especially floored in that vein. So now that we've presented this theory, it's time to complicate the theory. So we're talking about assassins who are apolitical, who fit more into the vein of school shooter, and yet we all have the sense, and we talk a lot about how we are living in an era of political violence.
Right.
How do we square those two things?
Because we are living in an era of political violence, just as we were in the 70s. But to try to lump in the people who lash out at society for their own inner messed up reasons as somehow part of the general problem of political violence, I think is a category error. There are, for example, the people that are going and threatening to hurt people at election centers or school committee meetings. They're not school shooters. They're not Travis Bickle. They're just people that are, I would say they're bad people. They're people that have gotten swept up in this notion that violence is okay. More and more we see that people accept the role of violence in public life. And I mentioned the 70s. It's easy to forget now because it's a long time ago, but America was living through a wave of left-wing violence, including bombing campaigns. I mean, universities and public institutions were literally exploding with people who had very obvious, in the same way that the folks going to school committee meetings, they had an obvious political agenda. You didn't have to agree with it, but it was comprehensible. But in both eras, that's a separate problem, in my view, from the people who say, I have to go shoot George Wallace to be famous.
Okay, so the distinction you're making is between organized political violence and individual political violence? Because as I was thinking about this panel last night, I went and read whatever court documents exist of the young man who broke into Nancy Pelosi's house and attacked her husband, Paul Pelosi. And the words he was saying were kind of deep internet conspiracy, far-right MAGA words. Like, you could say that he had a political agenda, just like you could say that the guy who showed up at Comet Pizza had a political agenda because he was reading a lot of stuff on the web and he repeated that stuff. And the Nancy Pelosi guy did too. But clearly, it's not stitched together or making any sense. So I wasn't sure if he fits into our category or doesn't fit into our category, or what's the taxonomy.
But I think what you're seeing with a lot of these guys is that they're going to hurt someone, and then they go shopping for the reason that they're going to hurt someone. That these were people that were, on the edge, and then they sit down and they say, I have this kind of inchoate, diffuse anger, and what's it about? Oh, it's because they're trafficking children in a pizza joint. I think you see the same thing, I think, with some of the young people who turn to terrorism. And, like in Britain, some of the kids who, ran off to Syria to join ISIS. These were misfit kids, a lot of them, who, I always love that for some reason in Britain, the resume of these, young kids turned terrorists also always includes like failed hip hop star for some reason. But you can almost see that the anger comes first, the social isolation comes first, and then the shopping for the cause comes next.
So maybe this is the way to think about it. It's the easy availability and ubiquity of the cause language. So there are eras of political assassination, say post-Civil War, late 60s, now.
And the guy who went shopping for a cause like that, I think, before our modern era, that we haven't talked about, is Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay, so let's talk about him. He's in the late 60s, the middle category.
I mean, Oswald was, we still argue about this today. Oh, Oswald Kennedy was killed by a communist. Kinda. Kennedy was killed by a crazy right-winger. Sorta, same guy. It's easy to forget because, we've become so drenched in Kennedy,
paranoia.
But Oswald his first target was General Edwin Walker, who was like one of the most right-wing guys. And Oswald vacillated back. He defects to the Soviet Union, and he doesn't like it there, and he comes home, and his wife at one point literally locks him in the bathroom because she's scared he's going to kill somebody. Oswald was, his life history is, he was a messed up, bad seed. He was probably going to hurt somebody, and you can see him in his life shopping for, I'm doing this for, Cuba. I'm doing this for America. I'm doing that. He was going to do it for some reason. And I think, let me contrast this because I feel the vibe building of, oh, you're just dismissing all assassins as nuts. No. In 1950, Puerto Rican nationalists attacked Truman and Congress in an organized, multiple assassins involved, clearly politically aimed campaign where they were going to try and take out the president. They shot up the House of Representatives. And as one of them said later, who survived the event, like, I didn't come here to, I didn't just want to kill people. I was here to die for Puerto Rico and be part of that, that movement. That's a completely comprehensible attack on, again, I don't mean acceptable, I mean understandable
like
attack
a suicide bomber. Maybe, like a suicide bomber.
I have this cause.
I have this cause.
And I'm willing to die for it. As opposed to the guy who says, Hinckley's almost an unfair example because it's such a clean, obvious case of a mental problem, right? Like, if I do this, Jodie Foster will notice me. But there are other guys. You notice that all the school shooters now, they leave manifestos. Every time I see one of these mass attacks, I check and I say, manifesto incoming within hours. You're going to find it somewhere. What was interesting about Crooks was there was nothing.
There's nothing, yeah.
And I think that guy was just so far down in the dark. But I think the one point I want to make about this is why it's dangerous, though, to try and mobilize these incidents for politics, because I really think it's something that's a kind of, we didn't want to use the term postmodern because it sounds kind of literary.
Sexy and literary,
kind of,
Makes it sound
but it's
cool.
There is something different about assassins after, let's say even after World War II, maybe into the 60s, and certainly by the 70s and the 80s. And I would argue that tracks with what's different about mass casualty attacks, which don't really become a thing. Here's a bit of music trivia for you. The first really big one that gets people's attention is when a young girl, 16 years old, she opens fire on a schoolyard, which became the inspiration. Anybody know this? The inspiration for a famous song? What? There it is. I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats. That was 1979. Now, if something happens in our culture that starts producing more of these folks, whether they're kind of anomic, sort of isolated assassins or mass shooters. But I think they're all in the same kind of category of people that we see more of after the late 70s.
Yeah, I guess it's hard for us to settle because we're also talking about this in the context of a modern democracy, as opposed to if you go way, 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 way back, let's say to a monarchy, the only possibility of transfer of power is killing someone. Like that's your only option.
Profession.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's an honorable profession. So yeah, is this a relic of that? I mean, I don't know.
I mean, if you go back 100, 200 years, you move up. You take out. I mean, we were talking the other day. You're Richard III, right?
Yes.
You kill the princes in the Tower.
Right. It's a victory.
And you're looking at it's kind of like you're looking at an org chart and saying, all right, I'm king. They're still here. I got to X those two out. I mean, that's the intrigues of these royal families when they were knocking each other off. This is very different. This is a very different kind of environment.
Another historical change I want to run by you, because you know a lot about national security, is literal security. So I don't know when Social Security, I think it was after the Gerald Ford assassination that Secret Service became regularized. Right now, there is a lot of security, a lot more security than there ever has been around a president or a presidential candidate. Is there some theory that you'd have to be really, out of your mind to try? That it's like if you were a political assassin who had a political agenda, it just would be very hard. Would you do it? No.
Not that hard.
Uh-huh.
I mean, as we've just seen, I mean, that kid in Pennsylvania came within, a hair's breadth of taking out Donald Trump. And I think, yeah, we have more security. We have this notion that we now have to bureaucratize the process of just protecting leaders. But I think that's led to a false confidence among Americans, because one of my favorite series of books is the Robert B. Parker Spencer novels, Boston Private Eye. And he's hired to be a bodyguard, and the person says, "So you can protect me, right?" And he says, "No, I can't." He said, "All I can do is up the cost of hurting you." He said, and one of my favorite lines, he says, "But anybody can kill anybody." And that's still true, even if you're the president of the United States. I mean, if somebody's dedicated enough to get near you and willing to accept a lot of costs themselves, yeah, they can probably do it. I think political assassins, the kind of people that are like a foreign power saying, how do we get close enough to Trump or to Biden, to take them out, right? Those guys have to think through all of those hoops. I think these kind of lone wolf assassins, they don't think about that. In their mind, they've scripted out the movie already of how this is going to go. And sometimes, most of the time, it just doesn't work out, and you don't even hear about them. Let's be clear about something else. Every president gets threats. It's common. You just don't hear about them because most of them get, nipped in the bud, and the Secret Service makes a visit. There was a guy I was just reading the other day about a guy, I think we were talking about this guy got 25 years for threatening Obama. I mean, Obama got a lot of threats.
And we've never heard of him.
I can't even think of his name because they found him. They went, okay, you're in danger. You're going away for a long time. But some of these guys can just get lucky, and that's the unfortunate part.
So in the last part of this, I want to expand our horizons a little bit to outside the U.S., like Japan. Is this an American phenomenon? Is this a larger phenomenon? I mean, we could start easy Japan, and then we can go a little more difficult to the Middle East. But let's start in Japan.
Well, I think the killing of Shinzo Abe proves this is not an American phenomenon. I mean, that was not a political assassination. The guy was upset. His mom had lost some money. And in a country where it's very hard to get guns, this guy was dedicated enough and had the time to go basically build like a blunderbuss or a musket, in his house.
So that's more like the school shooter model that you're talking about.
It's more like an American presidential assassination where a guy with a grievance or, some kind of gets it into his head about, kind of like a pizza, the pizza guy, right? Like my mother went broke and Abe is behind it kind of thing. You've seen this as well. The guy that killed Olaf Palme, I shouldn't say the guy that.
Can you say
guy
who that is? The guy who killed Norwegian?
The prime minister, and they never quite, the Swedes never quite figured out who it was, but they think they got it. It's like, well, a guy having financial troubles, middle-aged, a lot of alcohol problems. I mean, in a way, these scripts start to write themselves no matter where you are. Now, if you want to go to the Middle East, which is, this whole other
I think that
can of worms.
Because it's on people's minds, I want to understand if, say, something like the killing of Ismail, what's his last name? Haniyeh. Yes, thank you. You just want me to forget his name so that we don't go into this topic. We'll just drive by it. I do think it's on people's minds. Pager bombers. I mean, and Tehran did blame that on Israel. How do we think about that in this category of politically motivated or somehow motivated assassination?
I think we don't.
Okay.
I think that we look at countries that are de facto at war with each other and in long conflict with each other, killing each other's military and political leaders is a different category. It's a different thing. For example, did we assassinate Soleimani? I would say no. I mean, guy was wearing a military uniform. He's in a theater of conflict. He was targeted. We have this term of art now, targeted killing, which to me, I think assassination has a kind of
rogue, maybe?
Rogue, but also an assassination has this sort of outside of politics, outside of war. When we shut down Yamamoto in World War II, was that an assassination? Did we assassinate, Japanese or German leaders? We were technically at war with them. Did we assassinate Osama bin Laden? Bin Laden had said, I am at war with the United States. And I think the United States basically said, challenge accepted. And that was our argument, by the way. Every time the Pentagon took out a car full of bad guys, they said, well, they say they're at war with us in this conflict.
So if the actor is a government, although I do think there are instances where a government can, let's not go there. But for the most part, if the actor
or a government contractor,
we should call it. We should go by the euphemism. We should accept the euphemism.
Or we can call them
targeted killing is okay.
Targeted killing. We can call them acts of war. We can call them war crimes if we think they are,
unprecedented,
wrongly, operations that were wrongly executed. We have a whole kind of language about this. I used to argue with my students when I was teaching. They'd say, well, what about when states do terrorism? I'm like, terrorism for me is non-state actors inflicting misery on civilians. States engaging in terrorism, we have a word for that, crimes against humanity, war crimes, go to The Hague for that. And the only reason I'm kind of a pedant about this is that I think it's dangerous to start labeling all things you don't like with a term that happens to be congenial to you. Because then I think you start making bad policy decisions about what to do. So if everything is terrorism, then you live as we... Look, after 9/11, we labeled everything terrorism. And we ended up living in a national security state that did nothing but think about terrorism. And that was bad. I still think there is a fundamental difference in most people's minds and in their gut about a guy who is a veteran military commander carrying out regular and irregular operations in a field of combat who gets aced by an exploding phone or a drone or whatever it is, as opposed to a president giving a speech in front of a Walmart who gets hit by somebody who says, I've had problems for a long time and you're going to be the solution to it by making me famous. Those are just two different categories of things to me.
Yeah, I think my remaining question is, are there rules of war about that? Like, is there a debated or understood morality? Because since we do live in an era where terrorism is how conflict happens, you can get away with a lot,
There
we can put some restraints on it internationally.
This is where I go back to my professor days and say, in theory, there are, in fact, rules about this. In the United States, it is still the policy of the government of the United States, by executive order, by the way, under Gerald Ford, God bless him. Listen, I'm just going to say, Gerald Ford was a better president than most people give him credit for. He was a good man.
Small digression. It's still technically not against policy of the United States government to assassinate foreign leaders. Now, does that mean? And there are people that argue, well, but Osama bin Laden was a foreign leader and we assassinated him. Well, I don't buy that. But then again, it does become a lot of lawyers start coming in the room and say, well, this is somebody engaged in active, operations, harm. The one thing that has changed in international law, and then I will drop the intellectual distinction here, is that is the hot pursuit issue. That if people have demonstrated that they will have done harm to your people, you are allowed to go after them, even after the fact and in other places. And that didn't used to be the case. In the 1980s, when the Americans forced down a plane that had a group of terrorists on it in Italy, and we took the guy, really a kind of a movie moment, right? We wagged these F-14s show up next to the airplane and kind of wag their wings and go, get down on the ground. There was outrage. The Italians were mad at us. Everybody was mad at us. And George Shultz, the Secretary of State at the time, said, well, sorry, people who do this, we're going to pursue them, and we're not going to spend a lot of time, filing writs and all that stuff. That is now called, in international law, the Shultz Doctrine. Like, it's okay. It's okay. It's label. We have a label for it.
We have a label for it, and it's become more accepted in international practice. So, this difference between, assassinating, if we had tried, pick the foreign leader you don't like. It's still illegal for the United States to say, we don't like the leader of, Fredonia, and we're just going to take him out. That is still a crime in the United States, and I think you could make a case that it's a crime and an act of war anywhere else. But what happens if that leader is a military leader as well, leading forces in the field and directing operations, and then you get into some very sticky stuff about does he lose the presumption, et cetera, et cetera. I am not a lawyer, so
but
that's
at least
for them.
there is an arena of discussion for this. Okay, good.
Right.
We can know that. I want to end on not theory or history, but something that all of you, are going to be living and thinking about in these weeks leading up to the election. Donald Trump has very explicitly said that politics has caused the violence and assassination attempts against him. What he literally said was, their rhetoric is causing me to be shot at. I'll read you from an email he sent to reporters earlier this week. He said, the psycho who brought this rifle to the golf course was egged on by rhetoric and lies that has flowed from Kamala Harris, Democrats, and their fake news allies for years. How do we, it does seem as if the assassins are apolitical, but he's turning it into a political agenda. Does that in and of itself just kind of raise the temperature of things?
It certainly sounds like encouragement for other people to avenge that. And the even more disgusting comment, if it's possible, was J.D. Vance saying to our colleague David Frum, 2 people from your team tried to kill Donald Trump. It's just a despicable thing to say. And,
But what's the dynamic in calling it out, he makes it more, he manifests it?
Well, it's turning to millions of your followers and saying, this guy is part of a conspiracy to murder me. And again, it becomes like the Comet Pizza thing of well, I'm not saying you should do something about it, but maybe you should. There's a couple of things to think about here. First of all, for Donald Trump to be argue that rhetoric is dangerous is just the most amazing deflection and turnabout in American presidential history. And I would remind people that there's a guy in prison who used to drive around in a Trump van, who's in prison for a pipe bomb campaign against prominent liberals across the board. Trump didn't seem real concerned about whether or not your rhetoric could motivate people to violence back then. Sort of, waved it away. Look, we risk at this point not a heckler's veto, but an assassin's veto. Don't say anything bad in politics because somebody might go nuts and shoot up a pizza joint or send pipe bombs. That is Trump. I think that's a sign of Trump's desperation because he didn't do it after Butler. He didn't do it after the attack on him in Pennsylvania, which no one is less willing to give Donald Trump credit for anything than me. But I gave him credit for that, to say, he gave this maudlin speech at the GOP convention, fine, to your faithful. But when you start saying, you people, your team is causing people to come after us, I think it was really important that the Democrats didn't respond to that by saying, really, here's a list of the people that have done for a guy that says it's not my fault that people tried to sack the Capitol. I had nothing to do with it. I just gave a speech. I told them to come peaceably. I mean, it really is a remarkable amount of hypocrisy. Look, the one thing Donald Trump is right about is that political rhetoric will always be mobilized by people who are unstable, looking for political rhetoric. That's a fact. They will. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said these folks will go shopping, for somebody to say. And if they don't get the message to engage in violence, they'll intuit it. They'll say, when so-and-so said Donald Trump would be bad for the economy, I think that's very clear. He meant for me to go take out Donald Trump. I mean, at some point that you just reduce this to don't say anything at all, which is what Donald Trump wants right now because he's losing and he's scared, and he's trying to use this to bully his opponents into being quiet.
Well, Tom, thank you for scaring us. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Friends, I urge you to go and read Tom Nichols' 2 articles about assassination. There's also a wonderful article by our colleague John Hendrickson, who just came back from a Trump rally and writes about the increased tone of the increased undercurrent of tension and violence. And he particularly takes note of the changing nature of Trump merch. The merch sold at Trump rallies. He and I have reported together, and he notes how many just kind of bullet, gun, death references there are in the Trump merchandise at rallies these days. Thank you all for being such a great audience and supporters of The Atlantic.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Tom Nichols and Hanna Rosin, for such a fascinating conversation. We encourage you to support our journalism by subscribing to The Atlantic. If you need more information about that and to activate your Atlantic subscription or giving The Atlantic as a gift, please visit us at an information and check-in desks. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you. Please check the festival agenda for what's left today, and thank you all so much for joining us.